Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
You're listening to Serious Privacy by TrustArc. Please welcome our hosts, Paul Breitbarth and Kay Royal.
Just over a decade ago, the World Wide Web Consortium W3C started the development of a do not track standard that would limit the way in which people could be tracked from website to website. The standard would also help to limit data sales since user profiles would become less interesting. But after many years of conversations and negotiations, the standard failed, and in 2018 the plug was pulled on the project. But now, Do Not Track is back. On the 6th of October, a consortium of organizations announced Global Privacy Control, a new technical standard to help companies meet the CCPA Do Not Sell requirement and similar requirements around the world. Global Privacy Control is supported by the likes of Mozilla and Brave, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and the New York Times, as well as the company from today's guest, Abine. Rob Shavell co-founded the Boston-based company in 2009, and looking at his track record, he certainly will have a lot to say about privacy-friendly, consumer-facing solutions. My name is Paul Breitbarth.
And I'm Kay Royal, and welcome to Serious Privacy. So I'm really excited about today, but Paul, I'll have to tell you I'm running a little late on the unexpected question because Charlie the cat tried to put in an appearance. So, let's see. Oh, I like this one. Teacher or student? So, Rob, that is the unexpected question. Teacher or student? And I think it refers to what would you consider yourself?
Lifelong student, Kay.
Lifelong student. Love it.
And why is that? Can you elaborate a little?
Well, I think as an entrepreneur, you always have to be a student. Of course, you're teaching your employees and your colleagues what you learn, and you're constantly trying to do that in a more efficient manner so that you can get all the stuff in your head downstream to people that can act on it, which is its own challenge. But ultimately, I think myself and most entrepreneurs are learners. We're constantly trying to figure out what we need to learn next and what we did learn from all the failures that we've experienced, and really entrepreneurship is a lot about failure and getting through the failure and learning from it. So clearly, from my perspective, more of a student than a teacher.
Well, let me say I'm a teacher, and I guess that's no surprise either. I actually spend most of the day today teaching fundamentals of privacy law to an international organization. Because of my passion for privacy, I like to share what's going on. I think that's one of the reasons why we created this podcast in the first place, to share our knowledge with the listeners, and I like to share experiences and best practices. I sometimes call it spreading the gospel of privacy. I'm not religious at all, but
a privacy evangelist.
Yeah, sometimes I feel a bit like that. So let's stick to teacher for now.
Well, and then y'all know where I'm going. It's going to be both. I'm on board with you, Rob, that lifelong learner, especially if I, actually ever complete my PhD, that, they're probably going to kick me out of the program for taking so long for. But they wouldn't let me do it on privacy. So I just kind of refused to do it, the dissertation. So, but we're getting there. And then, of course, teaching. Paul and I, the same thing. For the podcast, I love being able to bring knowledge to people, whether that knowledge is coming from us or that knowledge is, in most cases, coming from our guests, which we love. But I also do teach privacy law at my alma mater at Arizona State University, Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. Let's just put that plug in there. And I love it. I love teaching mainly because I learn more from my students. or I learn as much as they learn in class. So it's always teaching and learning at the same time. Okay, so
Wonderful.
With that, let's jump into the first topic, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe, Rob, first, can you tell us a bit about how you got into privacy and what Abine did what Abine is doing actually to help people be privacy friendly and control their own privacy?
Sure. I really got started too long ago now, over 10 years ago. And at that time, very few people were talking about privacy as a business. In fact, it was before Facebook's IPO. And I was a venture capitalist and an entrepreneur. And all of the people in my circles were talking about social. They were talking about how big social could be.
Mm-hmm.
And can we get into the Facebook news feed and all of this extraordinary growth, because people were excited about connecting with each other online, especially people like, our parents and older generations that Facebook, I think, helped connect and for the first time into social networks and things like that. So
despite all the awkwardness we see from the older people on Facebook, it's awesome. They love it.
Yeah, I mean, they do, and it was useful for them, right? There was no such thing as an easy way to share photos from family and extended family and friends for them, and it was a powerful first experience. Of course, we'll talk a little bit later, I guess, about how that affected the younger generation. But a lot of times, putting everybody together into one social network doesn't work. It doesn't work in life, and it doesn't work in digital life. But at any rate, myself and some much smarter entrepreneurs that had gone to MIT that I knew were talking about the big trends on the web. And one of my co-founders now said, hey, look, the problem really is about how we're allowed to control our information. And right now, the web is very flat. It doesn't give us a choice. When we go to a website, they ask us to register an account or to create an account to go shopping or what have you. And you don't have a choice. You have to tell them all your information, give them your credit card, and they're tracking your visit and all this other stuff. And there's no layer of the internet that allows people to do the same thing that we've been doing in social groups for tens of thousands of years, which is to be different people in a way, or have at least a different persona. The kind of information that I'm sharing with my extended family is different than the information I share with my significant other, which is different than the information I share with my college friends. And
as
that's
well, it should
human.
be.
As well, it should be. And that's human. We enjoy the freedom of having slightly different personalities and slightly different conversations and revealing somewhat interestingly, radically different levels of information to different people, because we're always doing that. It's what we've always done, and we're social creatures, and it's just sort of part of being a human. And we looked at the internet and said, or at least my co-founder, who's really a visionary, did, and said, hey, this is missing from the internet. Maybe we can create a really big company and a really interesting company that puts a layer of identity control. And we can call it privacy, we can call it identity, we can call it control. We used all those words, but we wanted to enable the internet with some of that nuance around information sharing and control that exists in the real world but didn't exist in the digital world.
Wonderful. So we don't do product plugs, but you have two
but we kind of have
products,
to here.
Right? Can you just tell us a bit about those? Because what I saw at the website, they are pretty interesting.
I'm not here to tell anybody to use anything that we make. I am here to talk about the issues. And we identified 3 issues when we started the company, and they turned into 3 products, which were then converged into 2. But the 3 issues around online privacy were the following. 1, when we go online and open our browser, open our mobile phone, a lot of information is leaking out about where we go without us doing anything other than surf.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one issue. And to stop that or help people control it, we created a tracker blocker, which shows individuals all the different hidden trackers that are being used when they visit a website in their browser. it counts them up. It gives them a little thing that says, hey, there's 11 trackers here. There's 3 trackers here. There's 0 trackers here.
There are 537 trackers here.
And it's something I think that TrustDoc knows a whole lot about on the business side. And we allowed people to visualize that and control whether they were comfortable with sites using those tracking. Like a lot of people would be comfortable with Google Analytics because they understand why a company would want to use Google Analytics, but they might not be comfortable with things like the Facebook like button, which was tracking people if their Facebook account was open, no matter whether they clicked the like button or not. Talking about consent is not silence is not consent. So there were lots of things around that, but that was the first privacy issue that we identified, and we mapped the product to it, and we actually called that product Do Not Track Plus. The idea was, hey, don't track me, and it was meant to be an extension of that standards process, which you talked about in the beginning of your introduction, Paul, which we can go back to. But let me just finish on these privacy problems. The second problem was, hey, we're constantly forced to give out our information. When we register for a new website, they ask us for our email. They ask us for, sometimes these days, for our phone number. And when we shop, they ask us for our credit card and our address and all this other information. And we said, hey, is there a better way that we can give consumers a more nuanced choice than just constantly either giving out their information or abandon using the website or the service itself? And so we created a product which is now called Blur, which is a password manager with special privacy features built into it. People call these features different terms. We call it masking, which is ironic in the middle of a pandemic where the entire world has to wear masks to avoid coronavirus exposure, except for the White House.
See, but, masks are good.
but we call it masking. But the concept is, Apple recently introduced a feature similar, and they call it relaying. Some people call it burner or disposable credentials. But the idea was when you go to a website in your browser and they ask you for your email, your phone number, and you click into that field, and you have our tool installed, Blur, what you'll get is an option. It says, hey, do you want to give them your real email? Click this button. Or do you want to give them a new email, an alias email, a masked, what we call a masked email, which is an email we create for you on the fly that isn't your real email. And so if that company starts to spam you or starts to track you via that email in a way that you don't feel comfortable with, it could be even your cat's name, you can customize them, that you have a level of control over it. So in a way, you're able to create personas for all these different relationships that you're creating online. So that was the second problem. And the third problem was, hey, our customers came to us and say, hey, that's great that I can stop tracking when I go online and I can use different credentials instead of my real email address and my real phone number because I'm getting constant robocalls, or my real credit card, which is constantly getting hacked and data breaches. It's great that I can make these masked credentials and use them. They're actually usable. That's great. But how about the problem that my information is already out there? I've already been using the internet. I already have lots of accounts. Like, what should I do? What should I do about that problem, Abine? And we created a service called Delete Me, which goes out, finds which you sign up for, and we have privacy advisors and technology. And we go out and we look for your personal information that's available on Google, easy to search, easy to buy at different data brokers. And we remove all of that information from those data brokers by using requests to opt you out of those databases, removal requests, and all the new laws that are happening, which I think we'll get back to with this standard that you were talking about before, Paul. So those are the three components that we felt were important to solve, problems we felt were important to solve, to give consumers more control and more privacy when they go online and conduct their digital life.
Wonderful. It's an impressive observation, I guess, is the right word, to bring those elements together and indeed make browsing the web a lot more privacy friendly for consumers.
I'm curious about the consumer buy-in to this. I mean, is this a a popular thing? I mean, I love it. I love it. But is this something that a lot of consumers are aware of, or do you find that is something more younger consumers are aware of, or is there a population it seems to appeal to more than others?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say we're, 10 years into starting this company, we're still in the early stages of awareness. And, this is one of those topics that we're constantly talking about with investors, with the media, and with with everyone with every one of our employees internally. And look, I think we've had a remarkable amount of success. We have millions of users using our products all over the world, and we have a really fast growing, profitable company now, which has been accelerating over the last 18 months, I would say, because I think there's never been more consumer awareness, about the consequences of digital data being out there and online privacy. And people are realizing this because of all the political things that have happened, post Edward Snowden. And people are also, even as recently as the demonstrations that were happening across cities in America, people were coming to us and saying, "Hey, can I sign up for Delete Me? I'm worried. I was involved in one of these protests or demonstrations." And people on both sides, by the way, people on the law enforcement side and people on the protester side. So there's just a growing, and Netflix has come out with this the social dilemma, and people are watching that, and Apple is now running nationwide ads about being a privacy friendly company, and that's why you should buy Apple products. So like the awareness has never been higher. All that said, to your question, it is still a tiny amount of a larger pie of people that are using the internet that understand what's happening with their data and understand the importance of having some level of privacy and control over it.
So speaking about control, what is global privacy control? I mentioned at the start it's some form of successor to the failed do not track standard, but that's just my words. You're probably much better than I am to describe what it is and what it intends to do.
No, I think your words are good. I mean, do not track was a failed standard, and I was in a part of the industry and consumer and political groups that were trying to form it and trying to have a debate about what it would be. And I remember many years ago, I sat in Brussels where, it's sort of like the UN of Europe, and all these people are being brought together there from very, very different opinions. And they try to, agree on things that should be a reasonable compromise for a standard. And as an entrepreneur, you're just sitting there, and I remember being so frustrated because the conversation was so political. And I just, after a while, scratched my head and said, you know what, we're never going to get there, that we're never going to get to an agreement between ad tech and consumer privacy advocates and Republicans and Democrats in the US and people in the EU that were thinking about what would become GDPR. We'll never agree on these points. And in fact, the industry could not self-regulate. And so that brings us to, I will never be a politician. I'll never be a teacher, and I will never be a politician. But it does bring us to your question, which is, so why, if that failed, what's this GPC, global privacy control? Why are you trying to do sort of the same thing again?
Right.
And my answer to that is, we now have a variable that has changed that we didn't have 8 years ago with Do Not Track. And that variable is, we have legislation that has been enacted for the first time, both in Europe with the GDPR and in California with the CCPA and in a bunch of other U.S. states that with pending bills to protect consumers' privacy rights, particularly their online privacy rights. And so what we are trying to do, what this consortium or group is trying to do, is provide a set of standards and easy to use technologies, both for consumers and for businesses and the owners of websites that consumers visit, to be able to talk to each other more fluidly, more efficiently about what their preferences are around privacy controls, data sharing and selling, and a bunch of these things that are now enshrined into law, at least in some US states and in Europe. So again, what changed is that Do Not Track never had a legal framework for enforcing behavior related to controlling your data before. And now we do have that. And so I think it's a worthwhile experiment to see if we can make technology help the new laws in practice. And one of the big problems with privacy, as everyone knows, is they go make some laws and then it has to get done in practice. And, that's why businesses like TrustArc are in business. And that's why people are still frustrated when they go from site to site and they get another message saying, accept cookies, accept these terms of service. And it's very frustrating. And I think as an entrepreneur, we really need to apply both the law and technology and to this problem so that we can have a better equilibrium, a better dialogue, and better solutions that work in practice, not just in theory.
Right. I do. So I was looking at the press release on global privacy control, and people know that we'll provide this link in the show resources for you. But one of them talks about the California Attorney General actually looking at regulating this to make it legally binding under the CCPA. What do you think that's going to take? Is it going to be by means of his enforcement, or is it going to be, you think he might actually pass this into regulation?
I don't have a good visibility into what any regulators believe or don't believe.
Pull out that crystal ball there, Rob.
You went to law school with some of these people. You probably have a better idea. They're weird creatures. They're independent minded, and they're very different than I do. But I can tell you, at least from my company's perspective, we can start to talk to the regulators in a way that we couldn't before if we have users and websites adopting this standard. And I'll give you a concrete example. If a data broker that publishes, profiles and advertises those profiles for sale on hundreds of millions of Americans receives a request via the GPC to not sell their data, and we at Abine and our Delete Me service goes on behalf of a customer and opts that customer out of that data broker's database and tells that data broker not to sell that data. And we still see later that data broker republishing that person's profile and that person's data for sale. We can then talk to the regulators with data.
Right.
And I think that's the kind of thing, just for example, where regulators can finally use data from the real world to apply to enforcement actions and can then consider whether they want to make technologies or certain standards literally part of the law or not.
From what I've seen, actually, the regulators would be fairly positive. And in any case, Advocate General Becerra on Twitter welcomed the development of the global privacy control. And he said, and I quote, "This proposed standard is a first step towards a meaningful global privacy control that will make it simple and easy for consumers to exercise their privacy rights online. The California Department of Justice is encouraged to see the technology community developing a global privacy control in furtherance of the CCPA and consumer privacy rights." So from that perspective, I think there is a lot of positivity, also looking at the possibility to indeed organize that central opt-out. Under the GDPR, there are maybe a few more questions, and I assume somehow that you don't read Dutch and that you don't read the Dutch Financial Daily on a regular basis. But there was also an article in the Dutch Financial Daily on global privacy control, where some GDPR experts said that it might be more difficult to use this in combination with GDPR and also with e-privacy, because the standard is still based on opt-out instead of the EU requirement of opt-in, and also questioning whether it would just work for cookies or also for other tracking technology like browser fingerprinting. What are your views on that?
Well, first of all, my dear aunt Alice was born in Amsterdam and is constantly sending me news articles in both languages, although I do not sadly speak Dutch. So careful what you wish for. I think that the consortium that's defining the standard, I think, has learned a lot from past experience with Do Not Track and from the GDPR. And I think we internally as a group of companies, both from many angles, both pro-consumer privacy companies like Abine, as well as publishers and other industry practitioners, believe that there's enough flexibility technically to incorporate a standard that works with the GDPR, that works with an flexibly with an opt-out versus an opt-in approach. And I think one that can also incorporate the kinds of other tracking technologies that are in common use today, such as browser fingerprinting and even more worrisome clandestine new tracking technologies. So I'm optimistic that the technology can be flexible enough, and we've learned enough over the last 10 years, really, to make this truly a global standard with a capital G. But I think it's going to require a lot of discussion and a lot of debate and a lot of adoption and trial and error across the EU and the US. And that's why we're launching this, because talk is cheap.
So what does that roadmap look like? What are the next steps, and how can we help?
That's a great question. I think that I will defer on the roadmap question to the group, and I should be able to get you all some information on what those next steps are. But there's an active developer community around the standard, and we're looking at lots of people that are contributing ideas and ideas, importantly, ideas in code from a broad community. And that's important because, any group is only as smart as the size of the group. And so as we open source and look to contributions from lots of individual researchers, software developers, and so forth, we're seeing ideas show up, I think, in the repository, the code repository, that are really new and interesting that none of the group thought of before. And I think that's just a very heartening, and it's very important in developing a innovative and dynamic set of standards that can be extrapolated to include more of the global community. And it's not just the GDPR. And now we're seeing standards in Brazil and even in emerging countries across Asia. And again, I think that's where we have the opportunity to really make this a global standard and a global conversation. So from a roadmap perspective specifically, let me get back to you. But I think we are seeing a lot of ideas, and like any standard, it will go through a whole lot of discussion and debate and input from the W3C and ideas checked in by random developers, working at night in Korea and who knows what. And this is just a start. And I think that's the important thing to emphasize. We are starting or restarting really a conversation that got lost in the woods of industry politics and so forth. And we're restarting that, and we want to try to do it the right way, but it is going to be a long road ahead. And we are very, very early. This is week number 2 or 3.
But W3C is back in the loop.
They are.
Very good. Kay, you want to move to California? Well, not physically, but...
I was going to say the weather there may be better than Arizona right now, but I actually am a little interested because I've been looking at your Twitter and trying to find, why are you driving towards this? What made you start thinking about this? I don't see anything out there about what your driver is. What are you passionate about for this?
Yeah.
Sorry, I know that's a hard question sometimes.
One should never look at my Twitter if you want.
I've been having a good time reading it.
If you want an industry approved perspective on Twitter, I tend to just randomly speak my mind and randomly tweet, which I think, at one point is the way that Jack Dorsey and his co-founders actually used Twitter. But at any rate, I think what drives me is a lot of people assume that I'm this privacy zealot who won't ever use social networks and, walks around with the equivalent of a tinfoil hat on and has a flip phone. And none of that is actually true. I do have an account on Facebook. I do share my information with lots of companies that I trust. But I really have come to believe and believe passionately that privacy and control of our information and visibility into it is sort of a fundamental part of being free. And if you really sit down and, I still have, go to Silicon Valley very often, though I live in Boston. If you really sit down with the people underneath the latest AI projects in Silicon Valley, we have these interesting debates these days, but they will tell me over coffee that they really believe that AI is going to be this dominant force that is really going to take over, in some senses, control of humanity. And, while I don't believe that, and we have these debates about it, I do think it shows how much data these people that are running the AI engines now have, and how predictive they believe that data is about us as humans, as individuals, and as groups. And I think that's something that everyone, if they're not, they're not thinking about it today, which they're probably not, because we talked about, we have millions of users and customers, but, it really needs to be tens of millions before you even register on the dial of a mass market. I really think it is an important issue, and I think it's going to be an increasingly important topic for everyone, consumers, businesses, politicians, regulators, to discuss over the next decade. I was talking to somebody about themes, and they were asking me, hey, you were around when the first internet.com boom happened in Silicon Valley in 2000 and 1999. And I was trying to look back and think about these themes by decade. And I think, the first, from 2000 to 2010, that decade was really about realizing what everybody was originally excited about when the internet bubble burst, which is, hey, the internet has all this promise. We can build amazing mobile phones, and we can build e-commerce, and someday malls won't exist, and all this other stuff. And that actually has come true.
Yeah.
But the next decade, the last decade, 2010 to 2000 to now, to the pandemic, has really, unfortunately, one way to look at it, obviously I'm biased, is it's really been about data and tracking. It's really about taking that first web that we built and making it super commercial and super data driven. And it's really sucked in a lot of humanity's digital footprint. And I think the next decade may be about trying to go back to somewhere where we can have an equilibrium.
Reclaiming privacy?
I'm not saying, put Pandora back in the box. I'm saying get to somewhere where we can have a reasonable amount of control, a reasonable amount of transparency, and a reasonable equilibrium. And this comes all the way back to the GPC. Somebody was asking us, well, hey, do you have any early data? Do you have any early data? What are your users doing? And obviously, people that find our tools, Blur and Delete Me, are fairly, you tend to think are fairly motivated by privacy concerns. But we actually get a lot of people that just want to stop spam, stop robocalls. They're afraid of hacking, or they want to shop privately without giving away their credit card.
Political
People,
texting. I can't tell you.
Exactly.
Political texting. God help us all.
Oh God. I mean, the political spam is out of control.
Right.
Hopefully it'll all go away. It'll all go away in 30 days. But what we've seen, early data, completely anecdotal, take it in context, is only about 32% of our Explorer users have turned on the global privacy control.
Got it.
Unilaterally, so that it's sending the same signal on all websites. We have a way in the user interface where you can turn it on for a single site and say, hey, don't sell, hey site, don't sell my information. But it hasn't been everybody, and I think that speaks to this concept of what I'm talking about for the next decade, an equilibrium. Mm-hmm. I think that there's plenty of people that are willing to share their data as long as they know what it's being used for, or if they're compensated for it, right, which is part of the CCPA and part of the new CPRA that's going to, if passed, supplant the CCPA. And it's part of some of the thinking behind GDPR, which is, we need transparency. But once you have transparency, there needs to be a better conversation between marketers, businesses, and consumers.
So CPRA is the ballot initiative Proposition 24 that will also be voted upon on November 3rd, right? And that should introduce more GDPR-like elements into the California privacy legislation.
Correct.
What are the chances that it gets passed? Are you confident that it will get passed and that it will set a new, even higher standard for other states and maybe a federal privacy law?
Well, we're supportive of the CPRA.
I was going to ask, because a lot of privacy people have, come out opposing it.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the main, I think all of this legislation is imperfect. And it's, I think I was writing a blog post about this, and I used the term ferociously imperfect, and I think my editors took it out. But I actually believe it in that word. I think it's that bad. And I think that's okay. But I do think as an entrepreneur, I have a tremendous bias for action. I cannot go back to Brussels and have another set of meetings about that I had 8 years ago about do not track, because I don't have the time or the patience. I'm already a very impatient person. And so I have a bias for action.
Brussels meetings are so much fun.
I know.
They only take about 2 years.
Well, there's a certain group of people. Don't get me started. There's a certain group of people that
I'm one of those people that likes those meetings.
They're lovely people. They take me out to wonderful dinners, but when they look back on their life, what have they accomplished?
It's fantastic. I'll just leave it at that.
It's the beer and the oysters are unparalleled. So, I have a tremendous bias for sort of deliberation in action. So, for example, if a lot of the people that oppose new legislation for privacy, CPRA, and other opponents say, hey, we need more time. We need more time to have a more thoughtful debate before we pass a law that has unintended consequences. And to that, I say,
I like that.
BS. We'll never get consequences if all we do is talk. We'll never learn. And your question initially was, hey, are you a teacher or are you a student? I think we all have to be students, and the only way to learn is to go to class. And you can't have class if you're constantly talking about what the classroom should look like. So I think the analogy to here is germane. I think we need to pass more legislation to create more informed, consequential debate. And by definition, there will be unintended consequences. There will be bad things that we have to go fix. That is part of learning, and that is part of making progress. If we're not actively doing that, and all we're doing is talking with a bunch of politicians and lobbyists, we're not going to make progress on privacy or anything else.
I like it. It takes more than talk. Yeah, I agree. So in moving to California, and I think, Paul, this is where you were going with this, where would you like to see California go with their regulation or enforcement? Either way, the consequences.
Well, I think I think one thing you mentioned is sort of where does it go after this? Does it pass or not? And then is there a federal legislation? And I was going to just touch on both those things.
Okay.
I do think it will pass. The reason I think the CPRA will pass is because I think it is tied to what I mentioned before with Netflix and Apple and this growing awareness we're seeing of people signing up for our services. I think that people are starting, even though it's a minority, are starting to wake up, care, and take action around their privacy. And if they see something that's a ballot initiative that says, hey, vote for something with privacy on it versus vote against something with privacy.
They may not be informed, but they're going to vote for something for privacy.
Look, who wants to read 54 pages of legalese? Nobody.
Hey, we make a living on that.
Okay. Some people do. And then they go out for a nice dinner.
Yeah, Pop reads it multiple times. Let's just be frank.
It's not always fun.
So I do think it will pass. One of the other things that people seem to oppose is this idea of pay for privacy. I think it's this idea that part of the law says that if you do not, if a consumer says, hey, don't share or sell my information, companies have sort of a right, a more explicit right than they had before potentially to give them less discount or a different price or, it's one and the same. And, to that, I would say as an entrepreneur, tough luck, EFF. That's the way markets work. If I don't give you all my information and you don't give me as much of a discount, it doesn't mean that poor people are going to get no privacy. It just means that markets are functioning. Now, there is a bigger societal issue. What's being tracked about groups, socioeconomic status-wise and things like that. But, on the internet, it is fair for companies to charge and incentivize people. And if we don't start making this data exchange thing way more transparent, and if marketers don't start taking it seriously, we're never going to get anywhere. I guarantee you we will never get anywhere. So you have to have differential pricing based on the amount of data that is being shared or not being shared. And I hope that's part of a federal privacy bill. And I hope it is too. Whoever is whatever administration is in the White House, I am optimistic that we will, if not enact a privacy bill, make much more progress towards, one of the two that are already drafted and on the table.
And I will say, when I say that I hope it's in there I hope it actually goes to this level of addressing these topics, because most of the federal privacy legislation you see get anywhere really is amazingly watered down and superficial and just goes across the top. So I really do hope that we get something meaningful and substantive. And I loved seeing where the law is driving. But I'll wrap it up, Paul. Unless you have a question, I'll just ask Rob, when you decided to come on the show, was there anything in particular that you had in mind that you wanted to make sure that we get out to the audience? He's shaking his head.
There was zero. I enjoy getting on having a conversation like we've had today, especially people in the U.S. and Europe, both the business side of sort of privacy and the consumer side and the politics around it. I think it's important to talk about, and so thank you for having me.
You're just a privacy geek.
So maybe a little bit of an evangelist.
Evangelist sounds a little bit better widespread than you're just a privacy geek. I love it. Or a privacy zealot. I like that.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll wrap up today's episode of Serious Privacy. If you want to know more about global privacy control, I recommend you go to their website, globalprivacycontrol.org. We'll also post the link to the GitHub in the show notes for all those of you who really want to dive deep into all the technical details. It is worth to take a look there, and we'll post some further links in the Dutch article for those of you who really
that
want
Rob's
to
aunt might send them.
Punish themselves in the show notes. If you like our series, please do tell your friends and colleagues and review us in your favorite podcast app. And should you have any questions or suggestions, or if indeed you want to be on a future episode of Serious Privacy, feel free to reach out to us via seriousprivacy@trustarc.com or via Twitter @podcastprivacy. You will find Kay on Twitter as Heart of Privacy and myself as EuroPolB. Thank you again for listening to us, and until our next episode, goodbye.
Bye, y'all.
That was Serious Privacy.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No. That's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data, and get credible, cited answers based on NIMBY research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.